just to remind you, if you want to hear Italian, you have to click on the Chinese interpreter. And if you want to hear the Danish, you have to click on the Japanese channel. So today we are going to hear Ximena. So she's a militant of democracy and anti-capitalist in Argentina. Then we will have Tony from Hong Kong. And then we'll have Robert, who is a revolutionary socialist from USA and living in Brooklyn, to talk about Black Lives Matter. Each intervenant will speak for 15 minutes, and then we are going to begin by Ximena Gomez.
In Argentina.
Today I'm going to speak about the feminist movement here in Argentina, its characteristics. I'm going to speak about the feminist strike and the current struggles we are facing from the feminist movement here in Argentina. For that, I wanted to start reminding, I'm going to set the time, 15 minutes. So I wanted to start by speaking about the march, which went under the name of Ni Una Menos, 3rd of June 2015, because those were the basis for the first feminist strike in our country, 19th October 2016. At the same time, there was a new neoliberal wave coming, even if from the crisis on the year 2008, we've seen how precarization and mercantilization, commodification of our lives are accelerating. Mauricio Macri was the representation of the right, the religious fundamentalists, and the big economic powers in the government, and now as the opposition. And this bloc is the representation of this economical bloc that struggles against the rights of the majorities. So taking into account these political phenomena, I'm going to try to speak about the characteristics of the strike, the conditions that allowed for a massive movement, the internal debates in the feminist movement, and the current struggles. Speaking about the characteristics, I'm going to mention 4. First one is this extraordinary character. With this strike, the feminists take the public space to stop normality, to say that the death of only one woman was enough reason to call for a strike. It was a key moment, and to use this powerful tool the working class has, which for many people was unknown or not attractive. And it was extraordinary also because of its impact on the daily life and the more intimate social relationships, affectionate, and the days of struggle for the right for abortion in 2008, this was a possibility to fight, to change to change the way our desires work. And as our comrade Karina from Chile says, when desire is a conscious collective bet that mobilizes. In the second thing I want to point out is how reproduction is included into our agenda and in the public debate. And they are working with the comrades from the trade unions was really important to generate the conditions and effectively be able to do the strike. Once the international feminist strike was marching and saying if our lives are not worth then produce without us, we started to make more visible a very the possibility to make visible the the circuits of reproduction made able made lots of comrades able to recognize the violence they were suffering and also to collectively uh, understand taking the reproduction circuits to the foreground also allows us to rethink and to upgrade our trade unions. Third characteristic is related to the fact that the feminist movement during Macri's government criticized the politics of budget cuts because of its impact in politics of social protection for women, lesbians, trans women. That was useful to link feminism to the general social unhappiness. And the fourth issue I want to mention is its intersectional. As I said, the feminist strike was an upgrade of the meaning of that tool because intersectional feminism was key to understand the impact of policies and interests from G20, the OMC, or the IMF. The impact of the policies today in Argentina, we are going to start a new negotiation with the IMF because of our public debt. And even if the IMF wants to wash its face, they always impose their conditions which are against the interest of our society, or at least of the majority of our society. So the second group of things I wanted to speak about is the conditions for such a massive movement. Yesterday, it was the second year anniversary of the reject of our proposition for a legal abortion in Argentina. During these mobilizations, we got to be 2 millions just in a single city. It's a shame to have this votation against the right to abortion when 2 million people are struggling for this right. We were in a need to assess how we arrived to this point with 2 million people in a demonstration. The campaign for the right to abortion in Argentina has a history of 15 years, 35 years of plurinational meetings in which all the feminist activists who can travel every year meet during 3 days to speak about everything related to being women or LGBTQ people in this world, and how to resist and organize against colonial, patriarchal, and capitalist violence. All this year of organization created the possibility to have such massive mobilizations. And now to finish, I want to speak about 3 issues which are open around feminism, at least in my opinion. And I'm going to mention 3. First one are the debates around punitivism. Second one are the TERF expressions, trans exclusionary expressions, even if so because of these TERF expressions during the 8th of March meetings, trans comrades started again this discussion because this is part of our agenda, and this is important for the queer theory and to prefigure another society. And a third issue is our way to organize. The last meetings were difficult to coordinate and to get a collective and autonomous work because of the problems between the traditional left, the FIT, Frente de Izquierda, with some sectors of progressists, and that emptied the meetings. And this is a very important thing. And the experience of the 8th of March Commission in Chile or the Spanish state are very interesting to rethink our ways of organization. So to finish, I'm going to speak about the current struggles and how to intervene on them from feminism. The pandemics the pandemics shows how it works, the impact of economical power in the decisions of the states, health, education, energy. I'm sorry, my cat. And the importance of the sovereignty to take the decisions about people. The new government, which is a Peronist front, creates the Ministry of Women, Gender and Diversity, I want to point out that this years of struggle, feminists said very clearly that you can speak about politics and about a project for the country without them. It was clear that it was necessary to rethink the budgets, and this ministry has a bigger budget than other years, and the plan against violence is now uh, prepared to be carried on with the feminist organizations. And it's not like we have to party because of this, but it's important to recognize that there are feminist inputs in the activity of this ministry. So that's why we need an agenda which is autonomous from the state and to rethink our way of organization. This doesn't mean that we don't know how to struggle for rights, but to be alert because uh, the church is still lobbying with the power. We are still under the IMF, and abortion isn't a right. Trans people still die very young. There are killings, there are murders of women every 28 hours. 27. 69% of them are in heterosexual couples. And this also means we need to think about the sexual and affective relations, to think about what does being family mean. This pandemic too showed the emergency related to housing and also health and education in a feminist perspective are part of our current struggles. About the potentialities, Alberto Fernandez, our president, says there's no alternative to capitalism. And in front of that the depressing realism, the feminist struggles and the climatic struggles are key because they don't only speak about asking the state about issues, but also to dialogue and mobilize whole society from different uh, senses, different subjectivities, speaking about material issues, about ideology, also with young people. And from the left, we have to be with the movement, but also listen to the movement. And there, I think, where Cynthia Roots has said that feminism is a process to create a class subjectivity which tends to be anti-capitalist, we can include here the climatic struggle, but that needs new and more creative ways to do politics and to organize, especially for lots of our generations, because we need these people to fall in love again with the possibility of changing the world and doing the revolution. These new political practices can give us interesting inputs to think about the crisis, not only the capitalist crisis, but also the strategic crisis, thinking about our goals and projects, about the social reproduction, same as we spoke with Titi Bhattacharya a few days ago, to develop a program to struggle against productivism, about consumption, violence. Today in the feminism, the trans feminist networks in an international level with an agenda independent from the state and the input from the feminist economy about the sustainability of life, that those can be bridges to prefigure the society we are dreaming with. But first, it's crucial that we believe that this, but first, it's crucial that we believe that it is possible to think that changing the world it's possible, because if not, we won't be successful. Well, I hope to have spoken slow for the translator. This is a hard task, and thank you very much, and sorry for the timing.
Okay, thanks a lot. And now it's time for Tony.
Hi everyone. I'm Tony from Hong Kong, and can you hear me? Hi. Okay. So actually I have I have a PowerPoint and I want to share my screen. but now it said it doesn't allow me to do the screen sharing. So can you help me to?
So in case you hear me, Jonathan, you should have this option on the three dots up. You should have allow. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. So hi, I'm Tony. I'm an editor of The Owl, which is a left-wing online media in Hong Kong. I'm also a current research student, and my thesis is about the organization of the Hong Kong protest. So this presentation, I'm going to talk about the Hong Kong protest, about some updates, and also the controversy about this protest. So I want to give you a brief timeline first. Last June, the movement began with two gigantic demonstrations with 1 million and 2 million of participants respectively. So actually at that time, I thought this number might be overestimated. However, according to later survey findings, 42 to 45% of the population has participated in the movement, which means around 3 million people in a city of only 7 million population. So the scope of mobilization in this movement is almost unprecedented. Then the movement escalates rapidly. From July to November is the period of militant protest, police brutality, police collusion with gangsters, and the sacrifice of frontline protesters create a major momentum of the movement. This period ends until the police encirclement of the protesters to occupy PolyU, which is one of the major universities in Hong Kong. terrible things happened both inside and outside the campus. After that failure, the momentum of militant action is almost exhausted. After the decline of militant protests, the protesters moved to various fronts of struggle. Like new trade unions emerged because many protesters realized that after several failures to call for a general strike, they realized that only a robust organizational foundation can really call for a general strike. And also, they turned to a consumer movement that they boycott the pro-government and Chinese capital and also support the pro-movement shop and restaurant. So the right picture is some protesters mark the distribution of different shops on the Google Map. And also some apps also have the same function. Election is another front. The seat of district council and half of the seat in legislative council in Hong Kong.
Tony?
Hi.
We just need you to make a short break or pause and maybe also repeat the last sentences, because for the interpretation it needs to
Oh,
go
sorry.
No, it's okay. So if you could repeat the last part and then yeah, just a little slower. Thank you.
So I'm talking about another front is about election. And because some of the seats of district council and legislative council in Hong Kong are generated by direct election. So, and last year, the movement had a landslide victory in the election of district council. So this is the this middle photo. So that in the last year, the movement won most of the seats in the district council in Hong Kong. So these multiple tactics really keep the momentum of the movement for more than 1 year. But the most important update is the national security law. So the legislation was passed by Beijing at the end of June. The law allowed the central government to establish this Office for Safeguarding National Security of the Central People's Government in Hong Kong. So it aims to target secession, subversion, terrorism, and collusion with foreign forces. But protesters and many Hong Kong people are deeply worried about this because it has extremely broad room for interpretation. The punishment is severe, and the power of law enforcement is almost unlimited. Like the definition of subversion includes anything that causes serious interference, obstruction, or damage to the exercise of power by state organs in China or Hong Kong. So this could mean anything like joining a demonstration, writing something critical of Hong Kong or mainland authorities. In fact, this is what happened in mainland China. Many mainland activists who disappeared or were sent to prison for years are only very mild reformers. The national security law simply extends what Beijing has done in mainland China to Hong Kong. And there is almost no institutional barricade to stop the government from doing whatever they want to do. It is still unsure how the government is going to use the power of the national security law, but the legislation already follows with an extensive atmosphere of fear. The pro-independence localist organization dissolved. Some movement figures who participate in international campaigns left their organization or even left Hong Kong. And the pro-movement restaurant removed their poster.
En fait, Aurélien a quelques problèmes Est-ce que tu pourrais parler plus lentement, s'il te plaît? Could you just slow? Yes. I'm sorry, can you please put the interpreter on Tiffen, please, because I can't hear what you are saying, what Tony is saying.
I should slow down.
No, it's not your fault. It's my computer fault. Yeah, actually, it's my computer fault. It's not your fault at all. Just my computer fault.
So I should repeat this slide, right? I'm saying that the legislation of the national security law.
Jonathan, can you please put the interpreter on Tiffen so I can hear properly and translate properly, please? We are going to exchange the computer.
Yeah, so you want to shift computer, so you're translating from their computer.
Yeah,
Yeah. 10 seconds.
So,
I'm sorry.
What should I do now?
Tony, just 2 seconds. And
Not your fault, Tony. Absolutely not your fault. Mine.
Another.
Perfect. Just wait a second, Tony, and everything should be in order. So, audio, can you hear us? Audio, you just say when you're ready to go. Perfect. And then it seems, Tony, that you can please repeat the last part, but else just start again slowly.
I'm saying that the national security law follows with an extensive atmosphere of fear in Hong Kong. So one of the problems of the law is that the definition of the terms in the laws are very broad. So the government can do like whatever they want to do, and this is what already happened in the mainland China. So there are some pro-movement restaurants remove their poster and also the Land War memos, which is a kind of symbolic of the Hong Kong protest. But there are still some very brave pro-movement restaurants try to show their position through alternative creative way. For example, this restaurant on the right top, they put empty memos on the wall as a kind of silent protest. So another restaurant put poster like in a very CCP style poster, written something like always follow the party, and also like remind you are now in Hong Kong, China, so behave yourself. So they use this kind of alternative methods to show their position. So so here I want to talk about some of my involvement in the movement that is relevant here. So I am now working in a group that coordinates two types of courses to support the movement. So one is emotional consultation. Because after a year full of violence and traumatized experience, a lot of protesters have mental health issues, such as like depression, panic attack, all kind of PTSD symptoms. So they really need some method to help them to deal with this mental issue. Another course is information security training. So especially after the legislation of national security law, people are like thirsty for this kind of knowledge. The trainer teach them to do all the complicated digital stuff, like setting super long password in every device and account, using VPN, signal, multiple phones, anonymous SIM cards. Anonymous SIM card is likely to be banned in the future, according to the mainland experience. So you can see the protester in Hong Kong are really scared about uncertainty under national security law. So in the future, it is likely that the repression is going to be more ruthless, and the whole movement is going to be more underground. Actually, I have another part in the presentation, but am I using too much time? So if I speak too long, I can end here. Hi. Hi, sorry, I can't hear any reply. Hi.
Tony, they say you have 5 more minutes.
Oh, I have 5 more minutes. Oh, okay, okay. Thank you. So, so there are a lot of diverse views in the national level about the Hong Kong protest, and there are too many things that we can debate, and I don't have time to cover all of these. So here I just want to tackle one point because I don't have much time here. So one of the major criticism of the Hong Kong democracy movement is that the democracy movement in Hong Kong is, they say it is pro-capitalist and also backed by local tycoons. So usually they will raise an example, who is Jimmy Lai, who is a publishing tycoon and also the founder of Apple Daily. So indeed, he is influential in the democracy movement in Hong Kong because Apple Daily is only mainstream media that has a clear pro-democracy stand in Hong Kong. So in this stand, he is influential. But usually the critics cannot raise other example that the capitalists really support the protests in Hong Kong. Quite the opposite. In fact, in the last year, the Hong Kong General Chamber of Commerce and also 17 major real estate developers in Hong Kong, they all condemn the violence of protesters and they support the government to restore the order as soon as possible. It is also the same for the international capital. After the legislation of national security law, two local branches of the International Bank, HSBC and Standard Charter, they all publicly back the legislation. So this is a quote from Financial Times. There is an interview with a Hong Kong-based global head of equity strategy at one investment bank. So this guy said he believed China would be problematic on that matter and would not seek to undermine Hong Kong's role as a financial center. He added that analysts were used to accommodating the demands with the government around the region. So he said there's been self-censorship going on in Singapore for 20 years. So it's not surprising because the capital in Hong Kong, they come to Hong Kong aiming at the Chinese market. So it's natural for them to comply with the political view of the Chinese central government. The capital is, their objective is not fighting for democracy, but just earning for profits only. So actually, if you look at the capitalist view, they are generally supportive or optimistic about the legislation of national security law in Hong Kong. And so it is a very wrong accusation to say that the Hong Kong protest is kind of pro-capitalist. The Hong Kong movement is a democracy movement and is quite confined by liberal democracy. So it is not anti-capitalist, unfortunately, but also it is not pro-capitalist. So, so at the end of the presentation, I want to say that there are many problems in the democracy movement in Hong Kong, but my general position is that we should have a position of critical support for the Hong Kong protest, because the fundamental demand in the Hong Kong protest for representative democracy, for the freedom of speech and association, and also their voice against the police brutality are something very tangible and what leftists in the world should support. So that's my conclusion, and it's the end of my presentation. Thanks for your interest in the Hong Kong issue. Thank you.
Okay, merci beaucoup.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I will try to remember to speak slowly for the purposes of interpretation. Obviously, it's very exciting to be here, and when I get excited, I tend to speak quickly. My name is Robert Cuffey. I'm originally from Guyana, which is in South America, not to be confused with Ghana. In Brooklyn. And I'm a co-founder of the Socialist Workers Alliance of Guyana, as well as a member of the Democratic Socialists of America and a part of the Afro-Socialist Caucus for Black people and people of color, as well as New York City's labor branch. I work in the child welfare field, and I'm part of the DC 37 union, Local 371, the Social Service Employees Union. So I wanted to speak today then, I guess, a little more broadly about the uprising against the United States, the reference points to US history and the global touch points as well. So when George Floyd was murdered by Officer Chauvin in Minneapolis, Minnesota in May of this month, it happened in the context of a United States that was already suffering from a devastating economic crisis. And this economic crisis itself was brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic, which had and continues to wreak havoc across the United States. This havoc is compounded by the fact that the United States doesn't have a robust public health system, and it has these piecemeal bits of healthcare that are often tied to things like work, right? So like if you don't get insurance through your job, you're likely not to have insurance, and then you have to rely on a public option, and this public option is not readily available in all cities and in all states. And I think George Floyd's life is very emblematic of these three crises, right? Because we have a public COVID-19, we have a crisis, an economic crisis where millions of people are out of work and are unemployed. And then with George Floyd's murder, we then come upon a crisis of police terror and brutality. And George Floyd, he's alleged to have tried to pass a forged $20 bill. George Floyd is a father. George Floyd is someone's brother. George Floyd is a family person trying to make ends meet. He's trying to reproduce himself in the Marxist terms, in the midst of this economic crisis, which is wreaking havoc on everyone. And as a result of who he is as a Black man, the police get called on him. And as a result of who he is as a big Black man, the police decide to treat him like an animal, right? Like the police lock him in the back of a car, they drag him on the ground, and eventually Officer Chauvin kneels on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. But George Floyd could not survive the crisis of police in our society. And he tried to survive the economic crisis by doing what he had to do. But it's also instructive that in the autopsy that was taken of George Floyd, that they found antibodies for COVID-19, which means George Floyd had actually survived this pandemic that's disproportionately killing people of color in the United States, and Black people especially. So what then are the implications of our society that we're beset by all these crises, and Black youth launch an intense and militant rebellion against police terror that also speaks to economic demands within their neighborhood? And the response has not led to a meaningful material change in people's lives. I like to tell the story that here in East New York, Brooklyn, which is not a gentrified neighborhood at all, it is a working class and immigrant neighborhood of poor people, there is now an ever-present police presence about 2 blocks away from me. And what are they responding to? They're responding to young men who play dice on the sidewalk. And this is literally the extent of Black and brown life in the United States, which is that we're overly policed simply for being who we are. And it's, of course, measure tamp down militancy and to tamp down rebellion. Nonetheless, I think it's important to recognize that this struggle, which of course spread beyond Minneapolis to the country as a whole, and even had spread internationally to places like Brazil, where the struggle for justice for João Pedro was intensified in Brazil City, to Kenya, to the Jamaicans and to the Rastafarians in Jamaica. This struggle achieved really significant results nonetheless. There's disbanding of Minneapolis Police Department. There's the repeal of the 50A law in New York State, which previously shielded the disciplinary records of police who were brought up on charges or otherwise facing actions against them. And there's also this sea shift, change in consciousness regarding the police that has been brought about by this movement. Now, when you poll people and you ask them about questions like, what do you think about Black people's experiences with the police? Or if you ask, what are your thoughts on defunding the police? A clear majority of people now say, yes, Black people experience negative interactions with the police simply for being Black, and defunding the police is something we should give a try. In New York City, for example, whether you're a radical or not, right, it's a very jarring thing that about 11% of the city's budget is spent on the police alone. And it really begs the question in our society of who keeps us safe, and that's one of the main slogans in the protest movement here. Response of who keeps us safe, and the crowd responds, we keep us safe. And it's literally the case because we cannot rely upon the police for protection or for safety. And time again, when people do what society has taught us, when people do the thing of calling the police for help, the police respond by killing us. I can tell you why I'm wearing a sling, for example. I was like viciously attacked at a protest on June 29th to defund the police by a transit supervisor. And I was filming the protest at the time. So like there's a video of me walking 1 second and being just body slammed and tackled another second. And it happened within a few feet of the police. And the protesters pulled my attacker off of me and called the police over, and they said, hey, this guy's been attacked. This is the attacker, arrest him. Guy go. And when they came over to me and I was like, why'd you let the guy go? They're like, oh, there was so much happening. There was so much confusion. We don't even know what to do. But like subsequent to this, like video has been released of the police literally telling the guy he can go. So it's a very telling example, right? That even though our society monopolizes arms, it takes into its own, and working class people have no access to them. They still don't show up when we need them. And it speaks to the class basis of the society in which we live. But it also speaks to something that's deeper than these three present crises that we have. And that is that this capitalist system that we're in is also a system experiencing a crisis, a long-term crisis of profitability. And it's helpful and instructive to look at the history of how this long-term crisis creates acute crisis within the boom and bust cycle within the history of the United States. And if we go back to the 1930s during the Great Depression, the time during which these major labor upsurges that led to the creation of the Congress of Industrial Organizations pushed Roosevelt into making a deal with the industrialists to create the New Deal, we'll see that for all intents and purposes, while the New Deal great concession rested from the hands of the ruling class, the New Deal did not solve the Great Depression of the time. What solved that Great Depression was the fact that the United States entered into World War II and came out of World War II as the least damaged imperialist power, as the power that won contracts for the rebuilding of Japan and the rebuilding of Europe. And both war and this post-war rebuild entered into a period of economic prosperity, generally known as the post-war boom. But that boom would come to an end itself about 2 to 3 decades later, when the financial crisis resurfaced during the late 60s and 70s, right? So we keep seeing this crisis popping up, rising to the surface, creating this disruption. And the economic crisis is clearly linked with the oppression of Black people in the United States. Because when Black people in places like Harlem, Watts, Oakland, and other places rose up in these ferocious ghetto rebellions, what they were rising up against was not just police brutality, but their from the economic life of the United States, their exclusion from jobs and housing. And we won demands of public sector jobs, access to public sector jobs, and preferential access to public sector jobs through things like affirmative action. And it's very instructive to contrast the winning of these public sector jobs through a rebellion in the 60s with this current rebellion, this largest protest movement that has been created in the history of the United States. And if we use the example of New York City, what have we achieved? We said at the march where I got hurt, for example, defund the police. The city council came back with a resolution where the police were not just defunded, but they continued to have a budget of billions of dollars, a budget with dwarfs the GDP of many global South nations. But instead of defunding the police, they reshuffled austerity by simply taking the school safety agents who work under the NYPD and placing them under the Department of Education. And in addition to all of that, there is now a looming cut of 22,000 public sector jobs because of this budget that was passed. So austerity remains a lawful reaction of the system because of this underlying economic crisis. So instead of asking the government, in the way our popular slogans say, money for schools, not for wars, money for hospitals, not for cops, we also have to then say it is an issue of political priority where the money goes, the money that's available, and we have to fight to remake those priorities by saying, for example, tax, right? Why should we, the working people, why should we Black people, the people suffering under the thumb of this system, be made to pay for the crisis? Why not let the people who created the crisis pay for it? Let the ruling class pay. In New York State, let Wall Street pay for the crisis. And we have a law on the books here in New York State that says every time a stock is traded on Wall Street, it's taxed. It's called the stock transfer tax. But because we love Wall Street so much, we don't enforce this tax. But should we enforce it, we could raise approximately $10 billion over about 4 fiscal years. And what could we do with this $10 billion? Well, capital repairs for the city's public housing system called NYCHA, the New York City Housing Authority, is about $10 billion behind. And as a result, people in public housing live on the 13th times no access to an elevator. They live on the 13th floor and they oftentimes don't have access to running water, electricity. There's holes in the ceiling. So this historical moment in many ways unmasks capitalism. It pulls back the veil and it really takes the velvet glove off of this steel hand that is crushing us. And what has become accustomed in the global South, super exploitation and austerity, has come back to the United States like a boomerang. X ways, the chickens coming home to roost. And when Malcolm X spoke of this, he spoke of the military violence that imperialist nations. Yeah, so I'll wrap up here. He spoke of the military violence that imperialist nations used abroad and the ways in which they're honed abroad, but brought back to discipline the local population. And what we're seeing this time around is that both the super exploitation of the working class in the global South, as well as the pushing of austerity through the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the World Bank, these are being boomeranged back to the United States, both to the Black population, to the decaying industrial states along the Rust Belt. And in addition to that, the growing tide of authoritarianism seen in places like India under Prime Minister Modi, or in Brazil under President Bolsonaro, has seen a reflection in the United States under the openly white supremacist presidency of Donald Trump. And with Donald Trump threatening the basis of what makes the United States a bourgeois republic, it is imperative that the struggle for Black lives be part of the global and national struggle against this rising tide of authoritarianism. And should we in the United States defeat Trump, it then sends a great message across the world, right? That we stand in solidarity with the struggles against austerity and authoritarianism in Haiti, that we stand with the struggle against austerity and authoritarianism in places like Syria under the brutal dictatorship of Assad, and Brazil. We use a lot of old phrases from, we use a lot of old phrases from the Marxist left, but I think it's important to note that both we have nothing to lose but our chains, but also capitalism creates and continues to create its own gravediggers. And I think before we lose anyone else to COVID-19, as the new gravediggers of capitalism, it's imperative that we find time to bury this system once and for all.
Okay, thanks a lot, Robert. So now we can start the debate. But before that, we wanted to remember you that we didn't organize YouthCon this year because of the pandemics of the COVID-19. And of course, we will do it next year as each year. Next year in France. We are waiting for you, all comrades in the south of France, to discuss with each other, to share experiences, to bond with each other, and to share about our struggles. And to learn from each other, of course. And thank you. And then we can start the debate, and thank you all. And for the debate, people can subscribe on the chat of the Zoom. And when you subscribe, please don't forget to tell us which language you are going to talk.
so we can translate you.
Ok, Aurélien s'est inscrit. Aurélien, you can talk.
Me, if possible, because I think that otherwise I will be translating myself from French to English. So I think it's better to speak English. I really would like to thank each people who speak today because it was really interesting. I'm really sorry for earlier, for translation earlier. And I really wanted to say thank you. It's really motivating to see what is going on in the world right now. I have the feeling that something is going to change, but I'm quite not sure because in France, I don't know, because that's my question. So I don't know. This is my question. How do you deal with the fact that maybe there is going to be another lockout? Or do you deal with the fact that I have the feeling that most of our organizations are having difficulties to build themselves with young people? I don't know all things are going on in your countries, but for us it's quite difficult because there is a lot of people in the street, a lot of young people in the street, a lot of young women or young black or men or women in the streets, but yet we are still struggling to find a way to organize these people, really radical people, and to find a way to discuss strategy and to move in the same way and to go in this with the same goal. So it's really inspiring to see what you achieved to do in your country, but I would like to know how did you achieve to do that, because I think we can learn from it. And thank you again.
Okay, thank you. Theo would like to speak in English if it's possible. So go ahead, Theo.
Hello, everyone. My name is Theo. I'm from Brazil and from the left movement socialist, and I would like to speak a little about how the situation here is in Brazil, but also to thank everyone who had their intervention. I think both all those struggles in Argentina, in Hong Kong, and United States have inspired a lot us here in Brazil. And I think that that's something that Robert said in the end of his intervention that means a lot for us in Brazil, that the grave digger is of the capitalism creates his own grave diggers, because I think today we are now in a crisis that have created a necessity for the capitalism to create authoritarian governments and authoritarian more authoritarian than were before, constructions to repress the people and make it possible that they can make a kind of possibility of the continuum of the exploitation of all those situations that we know that in the world today are each time more strong. We in Brazil live in the Bolsonaro government, that's one of the most authoritarian governments in Latin America, but we can see that the struggles that are in place in most countries in Latin America are also a struggle against authoritarianism. Since the struggle of Black Lives Matter, I think that we can see the connection of the struggle of anti-racism, of anti-authoritarianism, and other struggles that we see in Argentina with the women's movement, the feminist movements that are connected in a way that I think is our responsibility to intervene in the movements in a way that we can possibility then to have a connection, an international connection with what's happening around the world. So we see right now what's happening in Honduras, for example, at the Garifuna people, the indigenous and black people are being massacred by the government, or in Bolivia with the coup that is taking place right now, which the election are postponed once again by this government that was put there by another coup. We see that the authoritarianism is a mark of the 21st century, and that also at the same time that we create, the capitalism creates the authoritarianism, he also creates the anti-authoritarian struggle that I think that are each time closer to the possibility of anti-capitalist movements, of anti-capitalism forms of organization get stronger and possibility of intervene in those anti-authority movement as such. So I think Robert said a lot of the connection of the struggles here in Brazil, and the anti-fascist and anti-racist movements were very strong in those last months here in Brazil, much inspired by the Black Lives movement, Black Lives Matter movement, and I think that it's bring us a connection that in America we are in the necessity and in the a very big necessity of connecting the struggles of the whole continent. And I think that right now we can see the anti-racism and the feminist and the anti-LGBT oppression movement has taken a lot to the necessity of being also a movement of anti-authoritarianism, of anti-capitalism, and the possibility of us to connect the struggles as a necessity to create a new form of politics in those situations. So right now we are in Brazil in the very strong struggle against Bolsonaro that has lost a lot of its popularity in the last months because of the COVID crisis. But we think that the most important fact that made a possibility to Bolsonaro right now have been in a defensive movement is because the struggles that have been taken in place of the anti-racist and anti-fascist movement that was a lot inspired in the United States. So I think that this connection, and I'm really grateful we can have this debate because I think it's a way for us to connect and to put the struggles together in this movement, represents a lot in the internationalism that it can provide us. Also has many ways to reinforce and to put our struggles in a way that we can be utilized as a form of strength in our movements here in our different countries. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about this anti-authoritarianism as a form of expression, a form of connection between these different movements in Argentina, in Hong Kong, in Brazil, and the other in the United States and the other countries that are here, because I think that is fundamental that we can use this place as a place of connection so we can reinforce the necessity of these struggles become even more anti-capitalist and even more possible of intervening in this reality that's a harsh reality with COVID, the proto-fascist government around the world, but I think that also gives us strength and creates the grave diggers and the possibility of a radical change. So I'd like to hear a little more about that too.
Okay, thank you. Pedro has a question. I will read it to you. So Pedro would like to hear a little about of this free movement we talk. So the feminists in Argentina, Black Lives Matter, press, and democracy in Hong Kong. And he would like to know the relationships between them and the radical left organizing the parties. If someone wants to enter him. Okay, so Robert, Finger, go ahead, you can talk.
Hi, hello again. So yeah, to speak very briefly to the question of how the existing radical left has related to these burgeoning movements, and to use the example of the Democratic Socialists of America, and the Black Lives Matter movement, I think, well, firstly, you would start off by saying that the Democratic Socialists of America is a disproportionately white organization, right? It doesn't necessarily have a firm basis in the Black working class or any real sectors of the Black community, which is not to say they're not people of color or Black people in the Democratic Socialists of America, or that they're not Black leaders within the Democratic Socialists. Point is, we're not represented within the organization in proportion to our numbers in the population. And I can say in New York City, for example, in response to this movement, members of the organization have played a leading role in both organizing protests and putting forth an analysis as to how it can move forward. But I think on a theoretical plane, the organization faces the same question that all organizations in the United States have faced regarding this question of racial oppression. And it's like, how do we move forward? How do you build the struggle? And in the olden days, it was a conception of, does the labor movement take the lead, or do Black people take the lead in the class struggle? And the Trinidadian revolutionary C.L.R. James, when he was in the United States, put forward the conception that the Black struggle has an independent that forged forward in the struggle based on the fact that Black people in the United States are the most oppressed sector of the population and have the least to gain from being in the system, literally having nothing to lose but their chains. And I think both the George Floyd rebellion, the rebellion that happened in Ferguson, Missouri, and in Baltimore, Maryland in 2014 and 2015 over the police killings of Michael Brown and Freddie Gray point the way forward on these questions, because those rebellions showed that people were rising up not just against police brutality, but also against the economic conditions under which they live. And their rebellions themselves, they lived great inequality in that the capitalist system was propping itself up on their backs. In Ferguson, for example, it was revealed that that municipality was funding itself almost exclusively through the ticketing of Black residents for minor crimes like traffic violations. In Baltimore, it was revealed that in this decaying industrial city, the police were setting up members of the community to rob drug dealers and keeping the money and the drugs for themselves. And in Minneapolis, and what's generally referred to as area, which had a reputation for having high culture and opera and all these things, the George Floyd rebellion showed that it was really a tale of two cities, a Black poor city existing in the shadow of this white prosperous middle class community. And I think the challenge for all organizations is to do what Lenin said, and to dig down roots into the most oppressed sectors of the population, whether it's in the United States or Europe or any of the parts of the working class population that exists without regard to bourgeois morality, bourgeois respectability, and these things. These are the people most willing to strike a blow against the system. And when they do so, other layers of the population, of the working class population, follow along. I'll just lastly say that requires a conception of the working homogeneous body, but as existing as a heterogeneous body, as a body composed of various social layers, as a body composed of various races, as a body divided by things like national borders, ethnicity, and also very crucially, gender, when we speak to, as Ximena pointed out, questions of the social reproduction of the individual, the family, and the class.
Hi. If you want to know the role of radical left in the Hong Kong protest, So I think that the first thing is that unfortunately the radical left in Hong Kong is generally weak and quite scattered. But people join in different fronts of the movement. So for example, as I mentioned, there is a wave of emergence of new trade unions in Hong Kong. So protesters in different industry try to organize themselves. And some of the radical left participate in these self-organization of the industry and to guide them to do the organization, and also how to say so someone may just see the trade union as an instrument to support the democracy movement, but with the participation of some radical left, so it can guide them to not only see the trade union as an instrument, but also learn to integrate the problem of like the labor rights and also the industry problem with the demand for political democracy. And so it really changed the attitudes of some of the organizers in different new trade unions. And I also know some radical left activists in Hong Kong participate in like a foundation called 612 Foundation in Hong Kong, which is the most important foundation of the Hong Kong protest that collects the donations from the general public and to offer legal support for the protester, because many people in Hong Kong, they're arrested and they really need money to help them to go through the legal process. But it is very expensive and not everyone can afford. So people form an organization to gather the money and to support these protesters. So people are joining different fronts and different role of this democracy movement. But the problem is in, I think the Hong Kong left wing themselves are not well connected to each other. And we don't have a very organized and distinctive political agenda. So that is the problem we are facing. Thank you.
Bueno, me toca a mí, ¿no?
Well, now it's my turn, right?
En Argentina, la izquierda.
In Argentina, the left is very broad. There are lots of leftist organizations. The most known experience is the left front here with some traditional left organizations. And after 2001 crisis, there were some new left which questioned the sectarism and the orthodoxy of the traditional left. So the feminist meetings for the 8th of March, the parties are not excluded, they can participate. The problem is that here in Argentina, we have the Peronism, and the Peronismo represents a kind of progressive look about working, inclusion. And that means we have to think how we dialogue with sectors in the movement. And with the feminist movement, the left, as I said at the beginning of my introduction, there's this tension of marriage and divorce, quoting Cynthia Rocha, because we have to work on several questions. We need to think about alternatives and how we include the feminist inputs in our program and our strategic view. And there we have to cut the ropes with parts of the traditional left. But at the same time, feminism, there's something I heard from a comrade, which is that feminism works on unconscious dimensions, subjective dimensions. It means we need to think, for example, about how we as women empower ourselves in the left organizations, but at the same time, we need to rethink the role of our male comrades, to think about what feminism represents in our program. And there are a whole lot of new ways in this new left that appeared in 2001 in Democracia Socialista. What do we think? We try to have a general analysis in all the sectors we intervene. We are thinking about economy or about the trade unions. It's necessary to have a feminist perspective inside. This is difficult, but it's a process. And I think the important thing is to keep on these debates, especially if we consider the importance of giving this input of a new perspective. And there are lots of difficulties here with the traditional left here in Argentina, because they think of it just as an isolated sector, and the challenge is to look at it as look at feminism as an issue which completes our program and our strategic looking at the complete reality.
Presentations, and there is so much in your in the countries you live in that it's actually overwhelming to even organize my thoughts or my questions, but I will try. But thank you, and all of my good energies to you, for Ximena to fall back in love with activism and world changing, and to Tony and Robert to recover from all the trauma, physical, but also emotional and mental, that your struggles have required, but for sure for a good cause and with good results. So don't don't feel discouraged, but keep on going like this. And so there are a lot of concepts that I really I found in other presentations that we had during our activities. So today for me it's a good moment to kind of wrap up all of the things that I learned about and that we could discuss. For example, the need to pay more attention on the lobby that the church does in Latin America, but in general as an institution. And so I would like to, well, first of all, to just tell Robert that it's always really empowering to hear about, let's say, concrete reactions to what is going on in the Black Lives Matter movements and all the Black-led organization of these protests. We talked about the importance of these protests, especially because they are showing the role of Black trans lives. And we also talk about it in one of our educational, and we have a video about that. If you want, we can also send it to you, because even for queer movements, this is being a really important role and a really important shift. But so talking about economics, I really enjoyed the way that you are saying basically that economics should not be a matter outside of people's reach. So how, and this reminds me of the attitude of a Spanish theorist called Amaya Orozco, because she says when someone from the economic field tries to stop you by saying, no, but this is not possible, but this will never happen, let's first try to think what we want. And then let's try to see where that money can come from and how we can put the money into these plans. So we should not let ourselves be stopped by technicians, let's say. And so I was wondering, what is your opinion on this idea that you said to make the rich pay for the crisis? I was wondering, is it also linked to the idea of the unconditional base income that is in the proposal of the Black Lives Matter movement, of having a unconditional income, and that because there is so much economic reparation also to be done towards the Black community and brown and Black community, that there should be an economic percentage that is going to repair all of these historical, let's say, differences that there are today. And to Tony, I wanted to ask if this net, this organization of shops and I think restaurants as well, and all this kind of commercial net, if you have any way that it's, I mean, if you think that it's working, and if it took a long time to implement, because I think it's a really good way to boycott you know, all the commercial needs that the people have. And I think it's something that we can really draw a lot of inspiration to boycott products here that also arrive here, not only linked to the Hong Kong question, but linked to all the coalition that also Robert was talking about. So the coalition of Modi and all of the right-wing, let's say, actors that are involved in instigating this authoritarianism today. So I hope it's understandable. If not, you can ask me to repeat. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Time is running, so we will ask for last round of questions and answers, and then we will have further debate. So if you want to answer, Clara, you can. Jimena is saying something in Spanish, so can someone just translate?
No, no pregunté nada, fue, sí.
Yes, Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, so it sounds like the program you're asking about, Kiara, is universal basic income. Okay, so that's a little complicated because while it's a good idea, I don't know that in the near future that it's immediately actionable, because most of the people who put it forward don't necessarily tie it to things that happened, like the George Floyd rebellion, right? Like one of the main advocates of it was this more libertarian type Democratic Party presidential candidate, Andrew Yang, and the universal basic income. Here in New York City, the Black Lives Matter Greater New York organization was pushing it as well. However, it's not clear to me that anyone has actually put forward legislation within, like, let's say the city or the state bodies, these legislatures, to get this passed, or that there's a federal bill to get universal basic income passed. And I think it kind of skips over certain other important questions, the things like a federal minimum wage. A federal minimum wage in the United States is still like ridiculously low and far from being a living wage. So I think the fight for a living wage that keeps up with inflation and the fight to give people cost of living increases are critically more important. I think there's a lot of very specific and immediate things to fight for right now. Like this week, something called PUA, Pandemic Employment Assistance, ran out, which was giving $600 a week to unemployed peoples on top of other benefits. And instead of renewing it, the Senate went on vacation. And I think those types of fights are a lot more critical at this time. And I think, you know, you can put forward any, and I mean any set of reforms that are based on change legislation. But if you're not also putting forward a militant fight about how to win it, then we're kind of getting lost in the sauce, so to speak, if you're familiar with that expression. It's we're kind of missing the goal, right? Like you can put forward any idea, like during his campaign, Bernie Sanders would always come up with these great ideas for a Green New Deal, for this and for that. And the question is, well, how do you hope to win it, right? Are you going to support a general strike if we don't get these things? Are you going to support shutting down the streets if we don't get these things? So I think radical imagination with ideas for change the world. And the question is, how do you win it? And, you know, as a Guyanese, I defer to Walter Rodney, who makes clear that, you know, none of the things that we win are gifts given to us from the ruling class, handed down from above. As he says it, only the working class can liberate the working class. And if anyone is offering you freedom as a gift, they're either trying to fool you or fool themselves, because freedom is not a gift. Freedom is something for which you fight and then for which you win. And you can amend that to almost any demand. Universal basic income is not a gift. Universal basic income is something for which we will fight and then we will win. But you know, it's not something that's on the lips of every person, right? If I go like next door to me, I'm in a basement, so I don't have windows, so you can't see, but there's a huge apartment building of like, you know, hundreds, if not over 1,000 people who live there. And if I was to knock on every door and ask them, what is universal? No, it's something that's very prevalent on the left and doesn't really have the kind of, sorry, my phone is going crazy. Doesn't have the kind of resonance in the wider community.
Hi. About the consumer movement in the Hong Kong protest, and I think it's a really, really interesting case. The first thing is that, as I mentioned in my presentation, there are some people they mark the distribution of different shop and restaurant in the Google Map, and I also produce some apps have the similar function. So some apps can work like this. Like if you use the apps, it can show the restaurant nearby you that which are pro movements. So that kind of apps really encourage people to change their lifestyle, because consumer movement is basically a lifestyle movement. So it requires a lot of people that really change their daily practice. So providing convenience is very important. How to identify different shops and restaurants is also a trouble. So usually the website and the apps, they would try to provide evidence of why they put these shop and restaurant as pro-government or pro-movement. Like if you click into like is restaurant A, and it is pro-movement, and below that it will show like it has like donate material to the movement, and so the evidence like a Facebook post, or how it support the general strike of the protest, etc. So it try to provide some evidence for you to know how it identify different position. So this is another important point. And I think in addition, the consumer movement in Hong Kong is interesting because it's not just a boycott movement. So it also have another aspect that is to support other protesters in the movement. So it encourages us to consume in the shop and restaurant that are owned by other protesters. So it kind of try to build up an ecology of the movement that the resources can circulate within the movement community. I think one of my friends who participate in one network of the pro movement shop and restaurant, and they try to so the shop and restaurant usually are close to each other, so it's also a community building. So they will think of different ideas to support the movement. Like they try to integrate with some like community service. So one interesting idea is that they try to collect the cans from different restaurants, which are near to overdue. So they collect this can and give it to the neighborhood for free. And they the can, there is a paper on the can, and so the logos and something. So they change that paper, and they put some like the material that related to the movement. So it's almost like an article, very, very long, a lot of words on it, and explaining why you should support the movement, why you should support democracy. And they also have an idea that if you finish the can and you can wash it and again, you can use the can to exchange for another new can. So it basically forces you to keep the can in your home. And so you have the poster in your home for a while. So that is this what they're doing. And I think these are also pretty interesting ideas. So that is.
Okay, if everyone wants to answer again, or if there is no one, we can close the debate. Someone has a question to Robert. I will read it. So I was wondering what is the relationship of the movement Black Lives Matter with the movement Trans Lives Matter? If Robert,
So yeah, so regarding the question of the relationship between the Black Lives Matter movement and the movement for Black trans lives, so I think they're intricately connected on an objective level, right? That we generally say whenever someone comes up to us and says, all lives matter, we usually say, when Black lives matter. And if you say Black lives matter, you can also add the rejoinder, when Black trans lives matter, because Black trans people, even within the Black community, levels of discrimination and harassment as well. Here in New York City, a lot of the coalitions we've been building has always included Black trans women and Black sex workers. In June, when there was a march to defund the NYPD, that marched to the home of the home of the city council speaker, Corey Johnson, I was asked to prep one of the speakers, who was this Black trans woman called T.S. Candy. She's like one of the most dynamic and powerful speakers I know, and also a great activist who Trans Nation and a founder of Black Trans News LLC. And when I met her, I felt like it was imperative to keep that relationship going. And I subsequently invited her to speak at other marches I organized, including the June 29th Defund NYPD march. And I've been able to build a relationship with her and the community of Black sex workers and Black trans people. And of course, Black transgendered women are overrepresented within the in the sex work community generally, because of the ways in which our society casts off trans people from home and from all the various institutions that would otherwise be supportive and turning them towards sex work as a kind of survival trade. So I can tell the story, for example, that we were going to help is put together Protect Black Women March. And one of the people we were working with reached out to a Black sex work advocate, and they had this back and forth over the question of decriminalization of sex work, where the organizer was like, I'm not for the full decriminalization. I only want to decriminalize the sex workers. I don't want to decriminalize the Johns, which is not our position. And we think it's the Nordic model that's pushed is not something that jibes with the reality of what sex work is in New York. We don't trust the cops to only criminalize the Johns, and any criminalization of the clients will lead to both persecution and prosecution of sex workers. But coming out of this, we kind of had to do some restorative and reparative justice of our own for the harm that organizer caused. And what we were able to do was have T.S. Candy give us a teach-in on the decriminalization of sex work. And it was a very powerful event. you know, where she not only went through the statistics, but also her story of being cast out and going to what's called a sex store from state to state to state. And she kept going on about the states. But this is like the lived reality of a Black transgendered woman and her lived experiences, which we were able to foreground in this struggle. So one of the organizing bodies I'm a part of in New York City is called the Fight for Our Lives Coalition. And Candy was so impressed by the infrastructure and support we gave for her presentation that she actually asked to join the Fight for Our Lives Coalition, is now actually part of our organizing committee. So the short answer is that the Black Trans Lives movement is a critical part of the Black Lives Matter movement, and it gives real content when we say that all Black lives matter, right? Like we literally go through a list of our demonstrations. We say Black lives matter, Black women's lives matter, Black children's lives matter, Black immigrant lives matter, and Black trans lives matter. All Black lives matter, specifically because of the issue we have within the Black community of transphobia. I can tell you the second time I saw T.S. Candy at a march, she was with her co-organizer, Tatiana Ferguson, and our march was about to head towards its conclusion. There were these Black men who consider themselves Hebrew Israelites who like preach on the streets of New York City and tell their ridiculous gospel about how they think Black people are the real Jews, everyone else is racist, a lot of this conspiratorial stuff. And when they saw the Black trans women go by, they made this obscene kill yourself gesture towards them. And Tatiana just stopped the whole march, grabbed the mic, and gave the most amazing presentation about how Black trans lives matter. And it's like, it shows that there's contradictions within the community, but it also shows the role of leadership that Black trans women are taking in this. And the Black Lives Matter movement, you can never be forgotten, is a movement started by Black women. The hashtag was literally created by Alicia Garza, a Black woman, and the women who founded the movement, the women who put this movement on their backs, the people who continue to suffer post brutality, repression, and trauma for this movement are Black women, and many of them are Black trans women as well.
Thank you. It's time to close the debate. So thank you, all of you, for your participation, and see you next year in France for the youth camp. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for having me. Have a great day, or evening, as the case may be.